Volcano, the Eruption and Healing of Mount St. Helens. Chapter 4. Links and More Links. Here and there, in the gray wilderness, a hardy plant grew, perhaps fireweed or lupine. It seemed to be the only living thing around, but it wasn't. Beneath its leaves were ants, ladybugs, aphids, grasshoppers, beetles, spiders, and other small animals. The plant was an island of life, an island of survivors and colonizers. Each kind of life made some other kind. The aphids, for example, suckled sap from the plant. Ants fed on the sweet honeydew that aphids gave off. Ladybugs ate aphids. Spiders trapped and ate insects, and also other spiders. Some meadows and areas of clear-cut forest had grown groups of plant survivors. With them were animal survivors, white-footed deer mice and pocket gophers. Insects and spiders had arrived as colonizers. The mice ate seeds and insects. The gophers ate roots and bulbs. But they also did something that helped plants. Gophers spend much of their time tunneling. They dig tunnels as they search for food underground. They dig other tunnels to live in. When digging, a gopher spreads its hind feet wide apart. It digs with its big front feet and claws, sending the loosened dirt back under its body. The dirt piles up behind it. From time to time, the gopher turns and pushes the dirt back along the tunnel. At the mouth of the tunnel, it gives a big shove and flings the dirt out onto the surface. These habits make the gopher a pest in a garden. The gopher eats bulbs and roots of plants that people want. It throws out piles of dirt on the lawn. But to natural scientists at Mount St. Helens, the pocket gopher was a small hero. Their gophers were tunneling in soil that was now covered with ash and pumice. By shoving soil out of their tunnels, they brought it to the surface. The piles of soil became places where seeds could put down roots and plants could grow. By looking under the leaves of plants, naturalists could learn what small animals were living there. At the mouth of its tunnel, a pocket gopher shoves out a pile of loosened dirt. The soil itself held some seeds, and it held the spores of certain fungi. There are fungi that grow into the roots of plants. Together, the fungi and roots form a partnership. The fungi takes water and minerals from the soil and passes them on to the roots. They do this job much better than roots alone can. In turn, the fungi, which cannot make their own food, take sugars from the plant. The gophers brought both soil and fungi spores to the surface. The spores sprouted, and the fungi formed partnership with the roots of the plants that grew in the soil. When the plants grew well, their roots served as food for the gophers. Above ground, the plants became islands of life, places where many small animals could live. The seeds of these plants spread and started still more islands of life. The root of pearly everlasting and fireweed above attracted a gopher, which, in its burrowing, brought up soil. A gopher mound, like the one seen lower right, may serve as a place where seeds can put down roots and plants can grow. Some ants found food in islands of life. Other ants had survived in places where there was no islands. They may have had some food stored underground, but to go on surviving, they needed to find food above ground. For many ants, that food turned out to be fire fungi. The fungi formed huge mats of tangled threads. Some of the mats lasted only a short time. Others grew in places where there was water and also food, bits of wood, and other dead matter. These mats lasted for months. They were the only food that the ants crawling over the pumice and ash could find. When ants from different colonies met at the mats, scientists saw them fight one another for the food. The fungus mats also served as seed beds for other plants. By the summer of 1981, the fire fungi were gone, and mosses were growing in their place. The mosses in turn trapped seeds in their rough surfaces. The seeds sprouted and grew into green plants. Green plants are living things that make their own food. So nearby, all other forms of life depended on green plants for food. Some take food from the plant, others eat the eaters of the plants. In making their food, green plants take material from the soil. In the nature, the material never gets used up because they are recycled. They go back to the soil after animals or plants or parts of plants die. Some of the minerals may be washed out of the dead minerals by rain or melting snow. Most are released as the dead minerals rot or decay. Decay is caused by many small forms of life such as bacteria, fungi, mites, springtails, beetles, millipedes. Some feed on dead materials, some eat bacteria and fungi, but most must eat the dead material to get them. Either way, the dead material is broken down and minerals go back into the soil. On the north side of Mount St. Helens, these small forms of life broke down the remains of animals and plants killed in the eruption. They broke down the droppings of animals. They broke down leaves and stems when plants died back in autumn. Minerals were released and used in new plant growth. Fire fungi put out thread-like parts that formed mats. The mats served as food for ants and as seed beds for other plants. A fallen maple is sending up new trees. In time, the trunk will decay and enrich the soil. Even the body of insects helps plants to grow. Many adult insects have short lives of only days or weeks. Also, as insects grow, they shed their hard outer covering. They molt. On the surface of ash and pumice, scientists could see the molt and dead bodies of insects. They could collect and measure them. They were surprised at the amount of carbon and other minerals in the molts and bodies. They realized that insects' bodies have always enriched the soil. But as one scientist said, we never even noticed them before because they are so small. Insects and other animals were food for the first birds that returned. Natural scientists think that all the birds on the north side of Mount St. Helens were killed on the morning of May 18th. Later that summer, there were many bird visitors. But at first, only a few kinds of birds could live and breed in the area. Junicos could because they eat insects and make their nest in hollows in the ground. Woodpeckers also found food, and some found dead or broken off trees in which they could make their nest holes. These are eggs of a killdeer, one of the ground nesting birds that were able to live and breed in the blast area. Bluebirds were able to find holes in fallen trees for nest. This one is carrying nesting material. Once woodpeckers have raised their young, they desert their nest holes. Deserted woodpecker holes helped mountain bluebirds to return. Bluebirds also nest in holes, but they cannot make their own. They must find holes that have formed naturally or have been made by other animals. Insects are also food for many kinds of fish. Most of these insects spend much of their lives in water. When they hatch from eggs, they do not look like their parents. They go through several stages before they turn into adults. Some, such as mayflies and katydid flies, spend most of their lives going through these stages. The adults live only long enough to mate and lay eggs. Both fish and water insects need oxygen. In many lakes, there was very little oxygen during the first few years after the eruption. They were filled with trees and bits of plants. Billions upon billions of bacteria and other Tiny living things were in the lakes, feeding on these materials and one another, and using up the oxygen. Surviving fish had to live near the surface, where winds stirred the water and added oxygen to it. They did not find much to eat. The first summer there were two main insect foods for fish. One was the rat-tailed maggot, a young form of a horsefly. The tail of this maggot is like a straw, and it serves as a breathing tube. In water with little oxygen, the maggot puts its rat tail and takes the oxygen from the air. The second food was the young of mosquitoes, which also have breathing tubes. The May 18th eruption wiped out most large forms of life on the north side of Mount St. Helens. The healing of the slopes started with many small forms, bacteria, fungi, hardy weeds, and seeds, insects, spiders, pocket gophers. Linked together, they formed a base that made possible the return of other kinds of life. In 1980, a wind-blown lupine seed lodged in pumice sprouted and put down roots. As the plant grew, it became an island of life. Its flowers produced seeds which blew away on the wind. April 1981. Dead trees cover the ground and float in Spirit Lake. A dome has grown in this crater of Mount St. Helens. A scientist scrambles to collect water samples and learns what kind of life are in the Ryan Lake. In later summers, wind-blown seeds produced whole colonies of lupine and pearly everlasting. By the end of the first summer, some survivors had died, but others were still alive and well. Colonizers had been arriving steadily. Looking up in autumn, scientists saw the air was silver with seeds and insects blowing in with the wind. Life was coming back to the volcano, as it had many times before. Fireweed sprouted through the ash and developed flowers which produced seeds that blew away on their silvery fluff. Exactly 2 years after the big eruption, a plume of steam can be seen rising from the dome growing inside the crater of Mount St. Helens.